We are fortunate to have with us Father Malachi Martin, and we are going to be discussing about the situation in the church today. And perhaps, Father, you can start off by telling us just a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now and what some of your background is.
Yes, Bernard, of course. I was born in Ireland 68 years ago. I joined the Jesuits, and eventually, after the usual training of 17 years, passing through various European countries and universities, I ended up in Rome as a professor at the Pontifical Biblical Institute. I was trained as a paleographer. Most of our listeners don't know what that is. It's somebody who studies handwriting, and my expertise was in Middle Eastern handwriting about the time of Abraham. But that became a very useful profession for the then Pope John the 23rd, because he needed contacts with both Arabs and Jews, and I traveled extensively in that area, the Middle East, and therefore I was useful to him. And I got very closely associated with John the 23rd and a certain cardinal called Cardinal Augustine Baer. He was the man who was in charge of ecumenism and who traveled extensively in the States during the council. But before that time, I had asked my superiors for permission to leave the Jesuits, and in 1964, Paul VI, who was then Pope, granted me the permission. He gave me permission to leave the Society of Jesus, and he secularized me. That is, I didn't want to be a laicized. I wanted to be secularized. That is, I didn't want to be under a bishop incarnated in a diocese. I didn't want to belong to a religious order. I didn't want to join Opus Dei. The only three alternatives for a clergyman, for a priest, in the Catholic Church. So he granted me that and gave me a general commission to write and to be active in the field of communications about the Church. And then I went from there to the United States, passing through Paris, and I arrived here in just 25 years ago, in January 1965. And from then on, I've been writing books and been very engaged in radio and television. I think I'm known as, probably as a conservative. We love tags in the United States. Some people would call me traditionalist. But Bernard, I'm a Catholic. I'm a Catholic priest. And I say my Mass every morning. And when permitted by the local bishop, I engage in the usual priestly activities. But my main activity is writing and confessional work and pastoral care of people who, today, in the condition of the Church, don't find pastoral care available, especially families who are at sixes and sevens about what is happening to them and their children and the public weal. That's a brief history. My books sell well. I've had 3 or 4 bestsellers, and that's due to the grace of God and not to anything I've written.
Could you please tell us a bit about a few of the books you've written that have sold fairly well? The most commonly spoken about one is The Jesuits.
That's right. It was, because it was the first book published which, in cameo, outlined what had happened, the major orders of the Church. In brief, between 1965 and 1975, the major orders of the Church, Jesuits, Dominicans, Franciscans, Carmelites, literally turned their backs on the papacy and proceeded to follow a line about the Church and about the mission of salvation of the Church, which is at variance with the traditional Catholic view of life and death and resurrection. I did merely a cameo study of the Jesuits, and immediately it was applied to all the other orders. They began to realize that something was extremely rotten in the state of Denmark, that if the Jesuits could have gone like that, and they did go like that, then they could explain the vagaries of the Franciscans and the horrible corruption of the Dominican order. And all these orders had been the bastions of the Church for centuries. And you know, it's a terrible reflection I have, that today, what John Paul II needs at the present moment, like he needs air to breathe, he needs a body of men, highly trained, specialists all, in every possible department and sector of human life. He needs them internationally established at all the choke points of civilization: Africa, Asia, America, North and South, Canada, the Soviet Union, old Europe, Western Europe and Central Europe and Scandinavia. He needs them highly centralized. He needs them utterly obedient to the voice of Peter. He needs them utterly devoted to Our Lady and her Lord. He needs them as priests. And that was the Jesuits. That's exactly what Ignatius has in mind. And today, they are not there any longer. physically instead of going down in numbers. You know, there are less than 1,000 Jesuits in the United States today. I think in 1965 there were 8,500. And every third man in the missions was a Jesuit. But it's not merely numerically. It is the quality. They literally have declared a silent war on the papacy.
Which is an exact reversal of their fourth vow, which is loyalty to the papacy.
Obedience. Obedience. Blind obedience was the key note. And that is why they were so valuable to the Pope, even to the point of permitting him to kill them off in the 18th century for the good of the Church, and then to revive them about 70 years later because he found he needed them. But that was perfect obedience. That's gone. So the Jesuits did create a stir and earned a lot of hatred for me and misunderstanding, except from the older Jesuits and from some of the younger Jesuits who realized that the truth was being told. Now, that was a very good selling book in the sense that it did a lot of good. It did an awful lot of good. It did open up what we call in the States a can of worms. It did show what happened. The fact was I had Jesuits writing me privately, anonymously, with money to cover 50 copies to be sent to an anonymous address, a P.O.B. box somewhere, because they didn't dare show the book in public. The other book which created a lot of stir was a book called Hostage to the Devil, published in 1975, and it's the only published record of 5 exorcisms of living Americans. It was based on video and audio tape because I have been very active in exorcism all my life. It was a bestseller here and abroad, and it still is. What it does is this. It proves that any man or woman over 50 who doesn't realize that out in those streets and in those boardrooms and in the boudoirs and in the corporate headquarters and in the army headquarters and the government chancelleries, who doesn't realize that Satan is alive and active and happy, that man or woman is a jackass.
That is a very difficult concept for the modern mind to grasp, because one of the first teachings of the Church that is being sort of pushed aside by modern theologians has been a belief in Satan, the devil, and hell.
That's right. It's the best PR job ever done. He doesn't exist. He doesn't exist. But please do this. Please kill the babies before they're born. Please establish a third way of life. It's human rights. Homosexuals have the same rights as heterosexuals. Please make homosexual marriage all right. Please use these contraceptives because then you'll benefit all mankind. We'll limit the population. It doesn't really matter if the people in East Timor are being killed off by the Indonesians. It doesn't hurt us. He's everywhere. He is everywhere, producing this demand for reason and tolerance and non-fanatic outlook. And every man is his own law, and every conscience is his own guide. This is the best PR going. But the devil, the old figure with horns and a dirty tail and yellow eyes and dirty books under his arm, hiding behind the bushes and saying, come over and I'll show you some sin. Oh no, that's myth and superstition. It always was. This is an angelic intelligence, far more potent than any human intelligence could ever be. It's an archangelic intelligence, and it is engaged in a life-to-death battle with one man, who's God, Jesus.
We've got ourselves into a state of affairs, I think, both in the world and the Church, where the devil is active and well. And we'll be discussing this situation later on. But to understand how we got there, we have to go back in time to the days of before the Second Vatican Council, when at least everything appeared to be all right in the Church. Among conservative people, there is some debate about, is that period in the Church of the 1950s, let's say before the Second Vatican Council, was it a very positive period, or was it a negative period, or what is a bit of both? What are, let's say, some of your reflections on that period of history just shortly before the Second Vatican Council?
Well, we can take this, Bernard, we can take this from a purely what they call historical point of view today, which is the secularist point of view. And you can say, well, there was this teacher who was a bit wonky in his theology, and there was this movement in the 30s about the liturgy which the Pope had to suppress. But